Yeah, you go up, love. I'm just going to drink me tea. Have you locked up? Okay, yes, I'll turn the lights off. Oh. Oh, do you know, I'll be glad to get these shoes off. Oh. Oh, that's better. What a day. What a day it's been. Huh. You made me cry. Bet you thought you'd never get an MBE, Mum. Right in me ear. Just before I was about to go up and see Prince Charles. I really struggled to compose myself. I bet Ed Sheeran thought I was a right nutty old bat. Ooh. If only I was 30 years younger. I wish you'd have been there to share it with your twin brother Tony and me.
Hi everyone. As you've probably already know, my name is Leo. I've been asked to deliver this video talk to schools so that students can hear my story of my addiction and my recovery. Now don't worry, I'm not here to bang on at you about why not to take drugs. At the end of the day, you're probably not going to listen to me anyway. I can't tell you what to do. But what I can do is tell you my story. I can tell you my story and I can tell you that if you do choose to go down this path, then this is where it could lead to. That these are the sort of things that you're likely to go through. But at the end of the day, that choice is completely yours. So I suppose I should start at the beginning. Now, I don't really remember my early years being particularly difficult. When I was little, kids didn't have their own TVs in their own rooms, so I used to have to play this game. I knew where all of the squeaky floorboards were in our house, so I would sneak out of my room after I'd been put to bed, and I would sneak down the stairs, avoiding all of the squeaky floorboards, and that was just so that I could sit and watch TV through the crack in the living room door. Now, when I was younger, my mum was a drinker. I think she started, firstly, because she was lonely. She didn't really have any friends where we lived with my stepdad. But as I got older, her drinking just got worse. Now, when my mum was sober, she was really nice. But when she drank, it was like she was just a completely different person altogether. And I used to have to start playing the floorboard game, but in reverse. So I was trying to sneak back into the house at night without her noticing. I'd sussed out how to get a key into the door without making a noise, and how to open and close the door without making a noise. How to get back up the stairs and back into my bedroom without making a noise, all in the hope that she wouldn't notice that I'd been gone. But she always seemed to come and check that I was in. And when she did that, I knew that we were just going to have this huge argument over absolutely nothing. I knew that I didn't have to do anything wrong for her to kick off. And for me at that age, that was just so annoying. So the route that I used to walk from my house to school was past where some of the older kids used to hang around and have a fag. Now, because my mum was only 19 when she had me, and there weren't any kids even remotely close to my age in my family, so I was always surrounded by people who were older than me, and I suppose that maybe made me grow up really quickly. So even at age 12, I related to these older kids a lot more, and so I started hanging around with them. So at age 12, while most people my age were still playing around with their action figures, I had already slept with my mate's older sister, and I was regularly smoking hash with my mates. So I remember one night I was walking home and I was stoned, like proper stoned. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to end up like my mum. So this is what I'm going to do. You know, at the time I was enjoying it. I was enjoying smoking hash. Now, I can still remember exactly where I was when I made that decision. But little did I know how much that decision was going to affect me today at age 38, almost, 20 odd years later.
16 years. 16 years since that night. The knock on the door. The police telling me there'd been an accident. Oh, it was the knock I dreaded. Oh, I knew it was highly likely to happen. But I had to stay positive. I had to hope that you and Si would stay in recovery and get through it. We were talking the other day, laughing in fact, me and Si, about how you used to tease Tans and say that she should be going out with you instead of him because you were the better looking twin. He misses you every single day. They've invited me to go on holiday next month. It'll be nice to spend some time with the children. Tony obviously has politely declined. He says it's stressful spending one day with them, never mind a full week. I think he enjoys the peace and quiet when I'm away. I'll just have to clear my diary though. Do you know I'm busier now in retirement than I ever was when I was teaching?
Because I had loads of older friends and everyone my age didn't have a clue where to get anything from, I soon figured out that the best way for me to get my stuff was to get my friends what they wanted and then I'd get mine for nothing. So my default method of paying for drugs was to sell them. I moved out when I was 16 and I lived in a hostel where there were loads of kids taking loads of drugs. I spent most of my time going to illegal raves, doing loads of cocaine, ecstasy, speed. I took a lot of speed. And you know, I'll be honest with you, you know, these were good times. You know, I didn't want to work. I didn't want a job. I just wanted to have fun. So the way I paid for my drugs was to sell them. If I was getting stoned, I'd be selling hash. If I could get my hands on speed, then I'd be taking that. Anything that I could get my hands on, I would sell it to pay for mine. To be honest, all of the people that I used to go to these raves with are now either addicts, they're in recovery, or they're dead. And it was actually a couple of these people who first introduced me to heroin. Now, I remember when I was at school, this woman came in and she had this big cabinet full of drugs and she told us about all of the different effects of them. Now, I was probably stoned at the time. I'll be honest, I was high a lot when I was at school. But I remember she pointed directly at me and she said, first, you're going to try cannabis. Then, you're going to try speed. And then a few years down the line, you're going to be addicted to heroin. At 16, I didn't believe her. But by the time that I was 18 years old, she was right. Now, heroin didn't really make me ill at first, like you see it does with some people. But people were telling me to leave it alone. People who had their own habits. But I was a teenage boy. I knew best. So I didn't listen. By the time I was 20, I had this opportunity to sell drugs for this guy. And as is often the case when you're selling drugs for someone else, I was the one taking all of the risk for this guy who he was the one making all of the money at the end of the week. And the amount of drugs that I was selling, this was a serious amount. I got caught and I got sent to prison for dealing. I was told that if I got less than 5 years, then that would be a result. I got sentenced to 4, so I thought I was really lucky. Now, the whole prison experience, it wasn't exactly great. But before I went in, I met this woman and we sort of started seeing each other. She would come and visit me every week, and a couple of years after I got out, we got married. Now, she thought that I was clean from the point that I went into prison, and I led her to believe that I was clean for 10 years. But that was so far from the truth.
The new version of the book's out. Who'd have thought my story would have helped so many people? At first, writing it down, it was just a way of coping in those early stages. Losing you, I've never felt pain like it. To lose a child, you think you're never going to come to terms with it. And of course, I was so worried about Si. You were so close. You did everything together. He vowed he would stop taking heroin and find recovery in your name. Live life for the both of you. I was worried it would be too much for him, that he would relapse, or dare I say it, take the same way out as you. He's still abstinent.
While I was in prison, I managed to persuade my family to fund my addiction. And when I got out, that continued. I ended up getting a methadone script to help me get off heroin. And although I'd always said that I would never touch alcohol, because of my mum, but I very quickly replaced drugs with drink. I was drinking 10, 15 cans of Strongbow a night, and I wasn't stopping until I'd finished the lot. With drugs, it was always different. With heroin, I could always stop taking it of an evening because I knew that I needed enough to get me through the next day. But no matter how hard I tried with drink, I could not stop until I had smashed everything that I had. I was coming home from work, nearly falling asleep, and I'd be thinking, I'm only going to have a couple tonight, and then I'll go to bed early. But after I'd had a couple, I always wanted more. I was trying really hard to hold down a job on a building site, but I was just exhausted from all the drinking, and I was really lucky that I didn't hurt myself or someone else. It was just this really crazy time in my life, and I just couldn't stop doing it. And to top it all off, I was still occasionally using drugs as well. Where I used to get dropped off for work, it was near where my mate lived in his flat. Now, he'd just got out of prison and he was on tag there. And his way of getting drugs was to get someone else around his flat to sell them from there. So I'd pop round, I'd say hello, not thinking of using, always thinking, I'll have a couple of beers, I won't go to the cash point, I'll just have a couple and then I'll leave. But every single time I'd go round, I'd go in, a couple of beers, I'd end up going to the cash point and I'd end up scoring. And all this time I was trying to hide this from my wife. I got hooked again, and I ended up losing my job. So I had to find a way to fund my habit. So I went back to what I knew best. I started dealing again. My drug use got pretty bad, and I had access to £11,000 in a bank account with my wife's inheritance in it. And I spent the lot in about 3 months. I was living this double life, and in the end, it broke me. It properly broke me. I couldn't cope with the stress of the lying. I was constantly trying to convince myself that I could pay back this 11 grand. And then on New Year's Eve 2013, it all got too much. And I left the house and I didn't go back. I just couldn't face up to what I'd done. The way I felt, it was horrendous. I was properly heartbroken, like that horrible empty pit feeling that you get here. And I tried to fill that hole with drugs, but there is no amount of drugs that you can take that will fill that hole. So I didn't go home, and I didn't speak to anyone from home for about 6 weeks. No one had a clue what was going on. My wife didn't even know if I was alive. I had left with no explanation whatsoever. But the way that I was feeling, it caused my addiction to get really bad really quickly. I was making really, really poor decisions and ended up owing money to people who you just do not want to owe money to. It was just easier for me to leave than to face up to my now ex-wife or the people that I owed money to, because if I did, I probably would have got really hurt. So I ran away, and I ended up spending 4 years living on the streets of Reading, which at the time, that situation seemed to suit me quite well.
I couldn't have made it to where I am today without help. At first, I felt I had no one to turn to. There is such a stigma attached to drugs. I got great comfort from attending the local Baptist church. I'd started going before that night. It was so uplifting. It was there I met the Crackit team. They supported people like you and Si in recovery. In fact, it was them who suggested I started to write everything down, get me feelings out, like a cathartic process to come to terms with what had happened. Having 2 sons addicted to heroin, the constant battles, the relapses, then to lose one of you. Once I started writing, I couldn't stop. It just came out, page after page after page. And then I realised that maybe my experiences could help other people. I'd found back then that there was very little support for families. Most of the charities just focused on the addict. But I'm sorry, no disrespect to you and your brother, but I needed help too.
Living on the streets, you're always distracted. You never know what's going to come your way, so you are constantly on your guard. And I was surrounded by people whose lives literally revolved around getting money, scoring, and then using. So it was a huge distraction from the way that I was feeling. And it was totally acceptable for me to be in the state that I was in because everyone else around me was in the exact same state. Having said that, it was a really tough experience, and it's one that I would never want to do again. I don't think it's quite as bad as people imagine, and I actually quite enjoyed being outside. I was actually homeless during the whole Beast from the East thing that happened. You might remember it from a few years ago. And I remember people used to come up to me and ask me, how can you stand being out in the cold like this? And I'd say, well, I don't get the chance to go inside and get warm like you do, so I don't really notice the cold. In the end, it was my gran who convinced me to go and live with her. She told me that she'd fund my habit as long as I applied for rehab. Now, I wasn't particularly keen about going to rehab, but I just saw this as a way for me to get my hands on more money. At first, it was 300 quid a week, and then that went up to 500. And then it soon became 500 quid every 3 or 4 days. Now, I was buying a lot of heroin. And I wasn't just buying it off someone on the street. I was buying this in bulk. So for the money, I was getting a lot. A lot of things happened which pointed me in the direction of this one rehab, and I ended up going for an interview there. But that was more as a way to keep my gran happy, to be honest. But I remember it got to a point where I was stood in my grand's house in Somerset, and I was surrounded by dirty needles, and I was about to inject myself with a considerable amount of drugs. I mean, like, there was so much in this needle that you couldn't even see through it. And it wasn't the dirty brownish stuff that you see on TV. It looked more like coffee. And I remember I looked at this needle and I thought, you're going to do that, and if that doesn't kill you, in 20 minutes, you're going to have another one. And then if that one doesn't kill you, you're going to have another one. And I was taking that much heroin that all I was doing was killing myself. It only would have taken what was in that needle to be a little bit stronger than I was expecting, and I would have been done. Literally, half of what was in that needle would have killed most of the people that I know, and I was there, about to take twice the amount, and in 20 minutes, have another one. And it was in that moment that I had a breakthrough. It's strange when you have a moment of clarity like that. It affects the same area that it affects when you're heartbroken. It's like this strange feeling in your gut, and you're just like, oh man, like, what are you doing? And I saw clearly for this moment, and I just thought, you've got to try. It can't hurt to try.
The book was one way that I thought I could create something positive out of the nightmare. And if it could help others, then I would have achieved something. It wasn't enough though. Si and I, we talked constantly about creating something in your memory, a legacy, something positive we could focus on to make losing you less painful. Something that would really help others in the same situation. That's how Drug Fam was born. I had this idea that I wanted to provide the support that I so badly needed but couldn't find. A port in the storm. Some way of raising awareness about the impact of drug addiction on families. How it can strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. The fact that it's everyone's problem. And the only way to raise awareness is to educate. I had this notion that I wanted to set up a charity. Charity in your name. But we didn't know where to start. So I drew on my experiences with the Crackit team and I began to research what I needed to do. And you know, when I began to speak to people, people kept coming forward with offers to help. And before I knew it, we had an office, a phone line, and premises, a board of directors. I decided I wanted to offer a helpline for people in the same situation as me, a port in the storm. I thought I'd offer a helpline a few hours a week. So when people rang up to speak to me, I could signpost them to organisations that could help. I should have known then. There are so many people out there going through the same thing, going through the trauma that I did. We operate 7 days a week now, with a team of dedicated staff and volunteers, a strong charity, the Nicholas Mills Foundation, known as Drug Fam. I wish you were here to share it. I wish you could see it. I don't know if you can. Can you?
It cost my gran £9,500 just for the first 3 months that I was at the treatment centre. Now, I know that I was really lucky that I was in a position that she was able to do that. They paid for the second 3 months, and then the final 6 months were paid by my housing benefit. Now, this brings me up to a point where I was at an event at the Towards Recovery Cafe in Henley. Now, I was there because the guy who runs our treatment centre, he was there delivering a talk, so I went to listen. Whilst we were there, a woman called Elizabeth Burton Phillips from the charity Drug Fam, she was also there talking. Now, she asked if there was anyone who would be interested in getting involved or maybe delivering a talk to one of their support groups. Now, I already knew who Elizabeth was before this point, because years before, my gran had dragged me into the living room when Elizabeth was on the telly giving an interview about her book, Mum, Can You Lend Me 20 Quid? So I was aware of who she was, and when she asked if anyone wanted to get involved, I really wanted to do it. But I was nervous. And I was nervous because I used to sell her son drugs around about the time that he killed himself. But something made me go for it. And now, you know, I'm quite heavily involved with Drug Fam. And Elizabeth, she gets me doing all sorts. I talk with one of their support groups regularly, and if I'm being completely honest, I think I get as much out of me being there as much as they get out of having me there. You know, I can't make things up with my ex-wife, and I can't turn back the clock with my family. So I have to try and find ways that I can make things up with myself somehow. I spend most of my time with people in addiction. You know, these are people who know the score, they know what it's like. So it always amazes me when families just don't really know anything. I hear their stories and I'll say to them, look, maybe it's like this for your son or your daughter or whoever, because when I was doing this, when I did exactly what they're doing now, I felt like this. So maybe it's the same for them. But unfortunately, the message that I'm having to give a lot is that people need to be prepared for it to take years, and they have to be prepared for the possibility that it might end badly. I have been in addiction for so long that a lot of the people I know are in the real tail end of addiction. And I mean, there's not much worse that you can have than that. There's no, once you're in that place, there's only so long you can be there until things sort themselves out or they end badly. I have lost 25 people in the last year and a half, and that includes my mum. And I hope that there is work with Drug Fam, full-time work with Drug Fam in the future, but I am my own worst enemy. So I look at people and I think, you're doing good. You're doing okay, and I'm not doing okay. So I can't be good enough to do this. So the thought of working for Drug Fam for a living, that makes me really nervous. But then I think, I can't, if I let that rule my life, then I'd never do anything. And then if I don't do anything, then life would become really unsatisfying. And then if life has become really unsatisfying, then the chances are I'm going to start using again. And so that's where I'm at. That is where I'm up to. I could talk for hours and hours and hours, but that is my story in a nutshell. I recently got a letter from a kid at another school, and it said, "Dear Leo, thanks for not being boring. It was nice to hear someone talk about drugs who knows what they're talking about, rather than a teacher who hasn't got a clue." And I suppose that's it. That's what it's about. I didn't listen to the woman with the cabinet full of drugs. And maybe you won't take anything from me either. But the only experience I have is with addiction. And if I can take the experiences of those years and use them for a good purpose, use that experience for a good purpose, then all of that won't have been such a waste of time.
I always feel you with me. Are you? Were you there at Westminster? What a day that was. The stress of pulling it all together. Lives worth talking about. A celebration of everyone and anyone affected by addiction. I remember knocking on the door of Westminster Abbey and asking, could I have a service there? Well, you don't get if you don't ask. I was bowled over when they said yes. It was to be the first time in the history of the Abbey that they'd hosted a celebration about how addiction affects the lives of the common man. That's what they told me. We were making history. The Prime Minister had accepted the invitation and would sit side by side all the hundreds of people I had met during my recovery journey. I was a little disappointed when the referendum got in the way and she said she wouldn't be able to attend. I said, you're the bloody Prime Minister. You can do what you want. But I understood in the end. I had to settle for the Home Secretary instead. The service, it was so uplifting to celebrate your life, my life, Si's life, and all the lives affected by addiction. To hear each person in that service shout out the name of a loved one, whether they were in recovery or that they'd lost, or if they were still battling addiction. I don't think I will ever experience something so spiritual again. You were very much in the forefront of my thoughts that day. Your name was shouted out with everybody else's. Nicholas Mills, my son. I just wish you could have been there, heard it. I don't know. Did you hear it? I'm going to bed now. It's been a long day. I wonder if Ed Sheeran knows what he's missing out on. Good night, Nick. I love you. I always will.